Welcome to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, where we help business leaders and individual contributors with actionable insights to hit their number and figure out the nuances of truly operating a business globally today, squeezing the essence of the lessons learned from the planet's top tech leaders. This is your guide to joining the fast track to global market scaling.
So continuing with our CRO Focus Series, we are discussing RevOps, CX, go-to-market, metrics that matter, forecasting, pipeline, digital transformation, and all of the above. We're looking for actionable insights from folks who have been there and done that. And today we have the pleasure in welcoming Dr. J.D. Miller, who to say has had an extensive career wouldn't do it justice. He's worked at organizations like OpenText, LexisNexis, and more recently at Motus in the mobile workplace technology space. So very keen to understand your evolution. Welcome, more importantly, to the show, JD.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, as we like to kick off in a consistent fashion, we often ask our guests to share with us their journey that brought them to become a CRO. It's not often an intentional journey, but one that becomes a fit later down the track. But maybe if you could share with us your career journey thus far, some of your inflection points that brought you to where you are today, so to speak.
Absolutely. So I did not intend to have a sales career. I went to college thinking I was going to become an attorney. And after an internship in the Clinton White House, where I was not the most famous intern, but nevertheless one of his interns, I realized that law really wasn't my passion. And so I went back to school. I had an undergraduate degree in communication, philosophy, and literature. And I said, what kind of a job can I get with this degree? And of course, none of them knew, but my communication professor said, why don't you stay and work on your master's? Because the internet is here. So it's the late 90s. And we did a lot of research around how groups form online and how virtual teams form and things like that. So coming out of the university with the master's, I was offered a sales job at a tech company called Vignette. I was employee number 26 there. The CEO had told me that they sold $750,000 that year, which is, a 20-something-year-old, that seemed like a ton of money to me. So I signed on, and we wound up growing to go public as actually the largest tech IPO of its time until Google took that title from us. Vignette had a $9 billion valuation, about 6,000 employees when we went public. Wow. And so that experience was one that I just really wanted to repeat. And I kept looking for SaaS B2B tech companies that were backed by private equity firms that were going to go through transition or something like that, or maybe go public. And so it led to a career of a CRM company, a variety of European companies that were coming to the US to make their claim there. And today I'm at this company, Motus, which is, as you said, a player in the mobility space.
Fantastic. I suppose just for the benefit of our audience, as we were sharing pre-recording, tell us about your White House experience briefly without dwelling too much.
So I worked in the president's office of scheduling and advance. My big responsibility was developing a little card he carried in his pocket every day that told him where he was going to go and who he was going to see, and provided little dossier about who some of the folks would be, so that he would walk in the room and say, "Hey, Ross, it's great to see you again," and have a little bit of background there. It was a great time, but as we remember the Monica Lewinsky story, which of course there's the big Netflix series on today, and we're revisiting it all 25 years later. It's hard to believe I'm that old. Just really realized that the legal wrangling and the public pressure didn't necessarily seem like the kind of thing that I wanted to make a career out of.
Well, let me ask you this: how is what you're doing now in relation to sales? So what are the similarities and maybe dissimilarities? Because I would argue that being a good salesperson today is about being well informed. And the reason I say that is because your buyer is likely as informed, if not more informed than you are, because gone are the days of going in, let's use the retail example, and begging the sales guy for information on the consumer good you're going to want to buy or you're interested in buying. unless you're my father-in-law, of course, who doesn't use the internet, but that's a whole other thing. Every buyer has the ability to be ultimately informed, and the power is at their fingertips. Maybe tell us about, how buyers are more informed today, and then just take us through a little bit of Motus, please, if you would, and who you're serving and what your plans are for the future and how you're embracing that new way of selling, if you could share.
Sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. When I began selling in the late 90s, we were trained to walk into a room with a blank sheet of paper and say, tell me about your needs and tell me about your business, and then I'm going to craft a solution for you. Over the last 20 some years, that paradigm has completely changed, where people won't take a sales call with you in order to educate you on how to sell to them. They show up having done internet research, having already talked to friends or references, and they have a pretty clear sense of what they're looking for. So, as sellers, we've really needed to raise the game and provide a lot more value from day one. I especially think during the pandemic, it's gotten even more heightened, because now, of course, we do so much selling and work over Zoom, and Zoom fatigue is real. People don't love to sit in front of their computer on camera 8 hours a day. And so if they're going to take a call with a seller, something that might have been an hour in-person visit is now, I'll give you a half hour, maybe 45 minutes, to get on a Zoom call with you. But since now I'm actually letting you into my home and into my personal life, if you don't provide a ton of value right away, I'm not going to give you the second Zoom meeting. I'm not going to give you the second sale. So, I think you're absolutely right that buyers are more educated and our sellers need to provide a lot more value. At Motus, as the CRO, ultimately I'm responsible for everything that's customer or revenue generating, and so that also includes managing our marketing team. And our marketers have to do a lot of work to make sure that when people are doing their own research on us, they're finding the things we want them to see. Our data say it takes about 17 touches for someone to go from not knowing us at all to being ready to take a sales call. And so, those 17 touches are going to include, of course, emails and cold calls and things like that, but it also includes blog posts that you might stumble upon, or engagement with us on Twitter, or banner ad retargeting, or all of those other sorts of digital footprint things that are going to form your knowledge of us before we get there.
It sounds to me like you guys are pretty good at revenue attribution, so based on what you just told us.
Yeah, so I talk a lot about that. I think in my leadership, I call my organization the Smarketing organization, and that's something I've picked up over the last few years, because historically, you've seen a lot of organizations where sales and marketing are enemies of one another, and they have these attribution arguments, and they have these fights about this is a sales lead, or this is a marketing lead, or stay out of it, or all of that kind of stuff. And fundamentally, that doesn't drive the business forward. And so, when I talk about smarketing, one of the things that we really talk about is how do we both claim credit, or how do we both get aligned on the same end goals? If it takes 17 touches for you to become a lead, was this a sales lead or was this a marketing lead? The answer is invariably yes. And so, while we do have pretty sophisticated metrics and tracking of, what was the marketing spend and where did this lead, engage with us, we try not to get in the big arguments about really attributing it to marketing or sales. But really, the bigger question is, are we spending our marketing dollars appropriately? Are we spending our sales resources and time appropriately? And is it getting us to a good result at the end?
Yeah, it seems to be a predominant theme from some of the conversations we've had already with some world-leading CROs, that there's a transition happening from, the kind of single lone wolf sales guy, or person who kind of walks the path and is a generalist and, kind of handles most of that buyer cycle on their own. It appears that in order to win and be successful, you got to inculcate a kind of mindset that it's a team sport. Yep. It's a blood sport, but it's a team sport. And the tricky piece for CROs like yourself is kind of how, for example, would you attach a revenue number or some kind of revenue attribution to an engineer, for example, or, how, even though people don't directly kind of bring the deal across the finish line or directly kind of are associated with the upsell or cross-sell motion, there's certainly a tribute to it. And
Right.
how do you do that? How do you kind of legislate for that with respect to, compensation and all those tricky things,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for me, it's about having a really clearly defined sales process, and that begins with lead generation, and having really explicit conversations about who's responsible for each part of the process. So we have a piece that we call our suspecting process, which is kind of pre-market intelligence gathering. It largely lies in our marketing function. Then we have a BDR role, which is largely appointment setting for sellers. Sellers are, their primary focus is moving a deal from first meeting through close. They're supported by a sales engineer. And then once we win a new logo customer, we hand it off to an account manager, who the account management function is responsible for, keeping them as a customer and keeping them renewal for the rest of life, with a customer success team that does kind of day-to-day, administrative help desk support. If we're clear on who's responsible for which part of the cycle and where the handoffs happen, we can absolutely generate comp plans that reward you for doing your part in the cycle. So, different people are going to have different levels of variable comp. Our hunting roles have, the biggest kind of percent of their compensation tied to quota achievement and commission, but sales engineers have a bit of variable pay tied to it. Our BDRs have a bit of variable pay tied to, the deals that they worked on, so that, everyone's aligned to win the customer, and then also to help each other out with all the right handoffs in place, to get from A to Z.
Very good. And just to set the tone or set the scene really, and offer some context around that sales process, or, in terms of the whole pipeline structure, how many sales stages do you have, including closed won and closed lost?
We have a 5-step process. I leverage a flavor of MEDDIC sales, which I call VEDPIC. It's a kind of a terrible acronym, but it's the 10 questions that I've learned over the course of my career you always need to have answered in order to get a deal done. So of course there's the basic, is there a value proposition, and who's the buyer? But it's also things like, what's your legal contract signing process, and how do you get access to funds? And so we really train our sellers on, the 10 questions of VEDPIC, and then our sales stages, as you go from stage 1 to stage 5. At each stage of the cycle, you're making sure that you resolve, the answers to those questions. I always say, by definition, on day 1, you're not going to have answers to all 10, but by the time you get to the end of your cycle, you'll have answered all 10 questions, and if they're all yes, you automatically have a signed deal.
And do you bake that I think you call it VEDPIC. I actually had a variation of that. I inculcated an organization called VEDIQ, very similar.
Oh, interesting.
V was the value, but the U at the end of that VEDIQ was urgency, right? Is there urgency? But in your P piece there, your VEDPIC or whatever, I'd imagine that's the paper process. Is it? Is that what the P is for?
Yep. Procurement. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's unbelievable kind of how many people on the buying side in their own organization have no idea how they would buy something that you sell.
Right. And being transparent about that through the sales process is really, I think, how we're effective. A seller shouldn't be embarrassed to pull out their VEDPIC sheet with a customer and say, I understand this is the first time you've bought this. This is the 100th time we've sold it, and experience tells us we need to answer these questions. And if you don't know what your process is, that's okay. Don't feel guilty, but let's make our next step you going out and researching in your company. Go ask the question and figure it out, so that next time you come back, we know the answer to that, and we can help you manage your process.
Yeah, I love that, because a great question there would be, do you want to be in a situation where we agree everything, we get we're ready to move forward, and we all want to kind of get this delivered by the implementation date, and we're stuck for 2 or 3 weeks additionally, on top of that, because it has to go through a particular kind of procurement cycle and sign-off process that we weren't aware of,
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So
And
it's
it sounds, John, like, I'm sorry to interrupt.
no, go ahead.
It sounds like you were talking about the lone wolf. I wonder if you'd read the Challenger sale, but the Challenger kind of book and research talks about the emotional journey a buyer goes on, and they're most excited about working with you after the very first call, after the very first demo, and then their emotions dip, throughout the whole rest of the sales process because they're getting all of this. Oh my gosh, how am I going to get money released? Or when does the board meet and how do I get that approved? So if after that very first call, we can lay out, here are the 10 things we know we're going to have to work on, you can get a project plan together and make it easier on your buyer to go down the journey with you than kind of wait till the end when they're just ready to get to implementation and they're stuck by their processes.
Wonderful. Yeah. I mean, I've always said that the biggest reason that deals stall or they don't happen at all is due to lack of alignment or consensus on the buyer side. And
yep.
It's hugely important to make sure that you understand everybody that has a stake and you in the implementation of not even in the implementation, but the buying and using of a new solution, but how it impacts them in their particular bailiwick and also personally how it impacts everybody. Because it's funny, somebody once told me it's like you're not dealing with every individual, you're dealing with two elements that need to be satisfied: the personal element to them, how does this impact them personally, and then also how does it impact them in their role and their job.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
If there was like 5 people involved in a decision, which invariably there is, I think the average is about 6 now, to in order to get that consensus alignment, you have to satisfy like 10 different elements if there's 5 people.
You're absolutely right. And at Motus, our core solution is about reimbursing mobile workers for the expenses they take on to do their jobs. So historically, that's been, you're a salesperson who brings your personal car to work. How should my company reimburse me for gas and oil changes and tires? More recently, with COVID especially, it's how do I reimburse you for your home office expenses and your cell phones and your internet? But that becomes a very personal issue, when you're selling the solution, because on the one hand, you've got the hat on of, this is an expense I'm trying to control for my company, and what is the appropriate amount of money I should be paying out for gas or for cars every day. But on the other hand, it's a very personal. My top performing sales rep is expecting to get some sort of reimbursement. They might get it confused with compensation. And so what's the emotional response to them going to be, if I say, here's a new calculation, or here's a new amount of money I'm going to give you, or you're no longer going to drive a company provided car, but I'm going to give you an allowance to go buy your own. So you're exactly right that there's always these 2 tracks of sort of the business value and then the personal emotional impact value that I think we have to dance really carefully.
Yeah, and particularly tricky when it's kind of like even in a B2B to C model nearly, that the actual buyer is not necessarily the user.
Right.
Yeah. So again, I would imagine from a product marketing perspective and from a demand gen perspective, or just to create the kind of impact piece or the value piece, you got to kind of do that in duplicate, really. You got to sell the proposition to an organization potentially for their employees, but also the stuff has to be kind of user friendly for people on the ground that are actually using it on the front face.
Exactly right. And so that means our marketing team, not only do we have marketers that do traditional demand generation to find people who want to buy this, but we have a marketing function that's just about user engagement and how do you interact with, the ultimate end user of the product and make sure they're enjoying it and finding it fair and valuable and, not friction into their role.
Yeah, so I'd imagine there's a bamboozling amount of metrics, right, that you have to kind of pay attention to, and that all kinds of data that presents itself, both in terms of usage, but also kind of, like you said, it all starts with that lead generation. Actually, it starts with your suspect piece on your market intelligence. Then that generates leads, then that generates opportunities, then that generates, kind of sales, and so on and so forth. So there's any amount of stuff. Your chosen topic, JD, today is kind of metrics that matter. Specifically to a CRO or an organization run by a CRO in the SaaS world. And yeah, we'd love to kind of hear what your view is around what are the real kind of core metrics that matter. We might go through maybe 4 or 5 of the top metrics that you feel are the most important. So let's start with number 1. What's a key metric?
Yep. So I guess I would couch it all by saying, when I think about metrics in the business, I spend a lot of time, really in my leadership style as well, kind of looking at the intersection of business and humanity. And for me, that means, you've got the business goal, and then you've got actual humans in the chair. And so when we're designing goals and then we're measuring metrics against the goals, we really want to be sure that we're setting metrics, we're setting things that that the actual humans are capable of achieving. And so where that plays out for me really begins with the annual annual budget setting process, where past performance is my biggest predictor of future performance. I think a lot of organizations have a plan that says, we did $200 million in revenue last year and we want to grow 10%. So I guess that means, I've got $20 million of quota out on the street. I don't think that's necessarily an attainable metric unless you can look at that $20 million goal and see, what did my individuals actually do last year? The people in the seat, what has their conversion rates been by? How many deals can they actually process in a monthly basis? What's the typical size of those deals? What does attrition look like? And then kind of use all of those metrics to drive to the
and the profile of the people doing it, were they tenured people, or kind of were they on ramp up, or were they there, a year, or kind of what does the profile of those people look like as well, I suppose would be important, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. So, to get to a very specific metric, I think one of the key 5 for me is about attrition, turnover, and tenure of my sellers, because we really do kind of look back at, a seller who's fully in the seat and is fully ramped. What's their quota capacity? What's someone's capacity in their first 3 months on the job, their first 6 months on the job? Because they're going to get better over time and you can expect more from them over time. But I think a lot of organizations make the mistake of assuming they're not going to have any attrition at all. And so they look across the team. I've got 60 sellers. They all have, 100. They all have $1 million quota, therefore I should get $60 million out of this.
Yeah, or they assign a quota to somebody that has like a shitty enough territory, and they say, you know what, yeah, he's going to do the same as like this A player over here that has obviously should have an A territory, but they make those assumptions and they don't look at the granularity of, well, what is the potential of that territory realistically, and I think that's your human stuff coming back in there again, isn't it? Like,
exactly right. Exactly right. And, we sit today here among the, I think they're calling it the Great Resignation or the Great Employment Shift or whatever. I was talking to someone yesterday that says in regular times, we assume 15% turnover. And in a lot of industries, they're seeing 45, 50% turnover annually. So, that's a key metric that's on top of our dashboards, all the time, but this year especially is, what's the attrition of our sellers? And what does that mean if I'm going to lose, 10% of my most tenured reps and replace them with a brand new ramping rep who has less conversion ability early on, and kind of having that inform where we're headed.
And there's also a whole cohort of people that don't want to get into sales. Like there's loads of research and surveys out there now that people are looking at sales as a career, and in terms of those top of the funnel people that you might want to come in and kind of balance out that attritional challenge that you're inevitably going to face. And it's getting thinner on the ground out there for people that want to do this as a profession.
It is. So, so there's that kind of macro level set of metrics around, how many people at what stage in their tenure, what's historical performance look like? That's how we set the big goal.
Brilliant.
I think then the next big metric for us is on an individual human level, how do you help them see where they're going? And so, on January 1st, we'll roll out to the team, here's your quota. And maybe I've got a $1.2 million quota for the year. The seller really needs to understand what's the specific tactic that gets me there. Do I have to do one deal a month for $100,000 each month? Will I have one deal sometime during the year that retires half of it? And then I've got, 4 mid-sized deals and 6 small ones, or, how does that work? Because I think, especially we have a younger sales team, or we're often the first sales career for our folks. If you just give someone a big number without a path there, it seems daunting, it seems overwhelming, and there's not a plan. And so again, kind of coming to the humanity is, that thing, you don't run a marathon at once, you run it, a step at a time and a half mile at a time, and so on and so forth. Really helping our sellers get a roadmap of how do you get there, and having that grounded in the metrics of last year's performance as well. What was our average deal size last year? You might put a price increase in place this year, but you're not going to suddenly, double the average deal size without doing something really unique. So, if your average deal is $50,000, let's assume that that's what it's going to be this year too. How many deals are you going to have to get done in order to retire your quota? And let's start, moving our way to getting you there.
And that invariably varies by market as well. Not all markets operate equally. So depending on kind of how global you are and what kind of territories you have, that's going to vary. And I think that has to be legislated for as well, doesn't it? Because
you're absolutely right. Yep. And territory and industry. So, we have a largely American prospect base. It's very different to be a Texas account as it is to be a California account or someone in South Carolina. And then our solution applies across many, many different industries. So if we're selling to a very, blue collar type of construction profession, it's going to be a different kind of deal than if we're selling to a financial services firm that's, kind of very white collar employees and white collar type solutions.
Cool. Okay, so yeah. That's two key metrics. Number 3.
So number 3 is really the metrics around day-to-day activity that are going to get you there. So if my rep has, now my rep knows I need to do a single deal every month, that's going to be $100,000. Again, looking at the kind of what were the human inputs that were required to get us to that closed deal. So I have sort of an inverted pyramid that we're looking at. It tells us that, based on close rate, for every closed deal, we have to have been in 3 opportunities. Conversion rates moving backwards. To get 3 opportunities, I had to have 5 discovery meetings, and then the kind of the math going backwards from that. For every discovery meeting set, I had to have those 17 touches. Is sort of the activity funnel that we're getting people thinking about. And then it's a lot of dashboards on, are you putting in the activities at the top end that's going to land with your deals on the bottom end?
Do you use technology in any of that with respect to giving opportunity insights, to say that this opportunity is performing like an opportunity that we lose, 80% of the time? Or because for me, I've always found that salespeople gravitate towards the path of least resistance, and they're always going to do something that they like doing, and also right. They're going to do something. The real good ones are going to do something where there's money, and right. Even though, and then sometimes that becomes a feast or a famine situation, where when the good times are rolling, they're rolling, but when the bad times are there, they suddenly realize they don't have enough pipeline, or right. that they haven't spent enough time nurturing, opportunities that they could have closed, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of insights, I've always felt that, and I know there's software applications out there and there's all kinds of AI and stuff like that, but every sales guy wants to know, right, when they're rocking in on a Monday morning, like, where do I spend my time? Like, what are the best opportunities that I should spend my time on, both in terms of most likely to close, but also most likely to lose? Do you guys use any kind of software to help with that?
We do. So, we run the organization on Salesforce, but the application I think that our sellers integrate or interact with the most is a product called Clary. And it is sort of an artificial intelligence that sits on top of all
you
of our
spell that?
Salesforce data. CLARI.
Clary.
And there's,
okay.
yeah, Clary.
Clary. Yeah, we'll get a
and-
sponsor. We'll get a sponsorship money off them, I think, next time.
Absolutely.
Clary. Okay. Yeah. So what does
but it
that
does-
do? What does Clary do for you?
It does a couple of things. So on the rep level, it's exactly what you just said about it has an artificial intelligence score that tells you this is a deal that's, likely to close or not likely to close, based on a couple of different inputs. And it gives the rep specific coaching on how to change it. And so, Clary is a very simple way for a rep to look at a deal and say, you have a forecast close in a week and a half on this deal, but we can see that you've sent your customer 20 emails and they've not sent you any back. Or, you haven't had any documents going back and forth between your organizations. So you clearly haven't done any legal review. So that data, that date is going to slip. And so it's a nice coaching tool for the rep on an individual deal, or for a manager to help a rep look at their whole territory and figure out, where do I spend my time? Where do I not? For me as the revenue owner, it also does all of the kind of artificial intelligence on forecast accuracy. And so it says, hey, John typically closes his deals 2 days early and 10% faster, or 10% bigger than he claimed. JD typically closes his deals a week later and at half the price that he'd been forecasting. And so it does all of that to give me sort of a rolled up weighted forecast average that, we've been using it 4 years now. It has consistently called the end of my quarter within $100,000 by the second week of the quarter. And so it's a really nice management tool that gives me a lot of confidence in sort of the financial plans I'm signing up for.
Fantastic. Too. Yeah, that sounds like something I'd be willing to investigate even myself as well. Okay, number 4. What's number 4 metric?
I think number 4 is really monitoring your spend. And this is probably my last one. So, this is a big piece of the marketing, as well as, when we're looking at lead gen, for every dollar I'm putting into my marketing function, I'm hoping to generate $3 or $4 of opportunity and close deals on the back end of it. And so it's really all of those metrics around, which channels am I putting dollars into, and what are they producing? And so whether that's, specific campaigns or event spends or things like that, we're constantly looking at sort of the ROI on our dollars spent, and then our allocation of people as well, and determining, are we getting the results we're looking for or not?
So that's so it's revenue as opposed to like pipeline generated or whatever. That's the ratio?
Yeah, I mean, we'll look at both, but ultimately, at the end of the day, we're trying to get closed business. So, if you're spending all of your marketing dollars on opportunities that never close, you've not made a great investment. So we do want to see how much opportunity is generated from our marketing spend, but ultimately, we're going to drive that right into and how much closed business came from that.
A very smart man told me, he was the chief executive of Salesforce in Europe, and he was a mentor of a software company that I founded many years ago, and he said that he was at a table with some super smart people, and the ratio that you're discussing there, the kind of marketing spend versus dollar revenue generated ratio they were discussing, and it was 1 to 8. Mm-hmm. And so for every dollar they put in from a marketing perspective, they're generating $8 in revenue. And he said, can anyone tell me what's wrong with that? And everybody said it's fantastic. So he said, can anyone tell me what's wrong with that? And nobody was able to get to the crux of it, and he said, what that tells me is that we need to hire more salespeople immediately, and that we're leaving a shit ton of deals and value for ourselves on the table. Because when it gets too optimum, the misnomer is that, like, why are you saving the money? Why aren't you investing that and bring it down to 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 and spend the other $5 acquiring more customers? Because the model is perpetually unprofitable on the acquisition side, usually, right, in a SaaS model. So it's really
Right.
about, how fast you can go, and it's a land grab out there. How many customers can you acquire?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and honestly, and this is where we are on our Motus journey as well. We announced about 2 months ago that so we've been owned by Thoma Bravo, private equity firm, and we announced a couple of months ago that an additional PE investors agreed to join the business. A big part of that is how we operate as a big leader in our industry, and we have a huge total addressable market. And so a lot of the discussion around those investments is exactly what you just said, is how many dollars do you pour into marketing, but how many salespeople can you get in the seats and get productive and get moving really fast to take advantage of the market as fast as you can. And that's a really exciting time for me as the leader of the organization, because it means we're going to be hiring a lot of people and growing the team and doing a whole lot of stuff. But those decisions fundamentally come from a financial or a boardroom discussion of the trade-offs of a dollar spent here and what's the result you get when you spend it, and how do we maximize it going forward.
Yeah, one of the main, I was looking at some core risks for businesses, particularly SaaS companies, for 2022, 2023. Obviously, talent is kind of headlining that pack in terms of that great resignation you mentioned, and the war on talent, etc. But the other risk is that you can have too much agility in your model. And maybe we can talk about that another time, JD. But as we round the corner here, we typically ask our guests what their superpower is, and kind of how has it served you in your career to date and your organization. So could you tell us what your superpower is, please?
So my superpower is about creating repeatable processes that you can plug sort of anyone into and hopefully get a good result. And that launched from a conversation I had 15 years ago with someone who ran sales at IBM. And he said, JD, you can have a lot of really smart salespeople, and presumably you're trying to hire the A player. And he said, at IBM, we have 400,000 people as employees across the world. In your hometown of Chicago, we've got 3,000 salespeople. And so just the rule of math says there aren't 3,000 A players in Chicago, and yet we have to fill all those seats. And so by definition, if you're going to be hiring an A- or a B or maybe even a C player, you've really got to be good on defining the process of how they do their job, what they do, and give them the metrics and the measurements, to inspect it and make sure that that machine keeps cranking. And so I took that to heart really early on, and it's really launched me into kind of this leadership model that's so metrics driven around, what are the humans capable of doing? What are the inputs, and what does the humanity mean the output leads to? And really, providing a very clear process for people to follow that if you repeat it, it works, and they can succeed at the end of the day.
Fantastic. Okay, JD, it's been absolutely wonderful listening to you, exchanging, those insights with us. It's a privilege. It's a privilege for us, and I know it is for our audience as well. I personally have learned a lot just by interacting with you here for the last kind of 35, 40 minutes. And we'd love to have you on the show again.
Absolutely, John. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation with you too, and appreciate all that you and Ross are doing.
Likewise, John. JD, been a real pleasure. John and I really enjoyed that. I think, my takeaway is in God we trust, all others bring metrics, and you're certainly bringing that to the table here. Clary's going to have to be a tool we investigate quite thoroughly. Couldn't agree more with you on the sales process and the delineation of each stage with a measurable, quantifiable metric. So we will hold you to your word about coming back on the show.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, and enjoy the rest of your holiday.
Thank you, JD. Be safe, be well.
You've been listening to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, designed for both established and aspiring career-focused tech rock stars, as well as helping leadership figure out how to speak global in today's multicultural world. For further details, check out sf-talent.com.